Well, welcome to the Audie Murphy Museum in the fourth lecture of the World War II History Roundtable, Audie Murphy Chapter, since its beginning. My name is Ron Robinson, and I have the privilege of serving as chairman of the Roundtable Board. The Roundtable was founded in an effort to memorialize the efforts and sacrifices of those men and women who served in World War II and successfully defeated the forces of tyranny. Our motto, printed in your program, says it all. They fought to save our nation's freedom. The glory is theirs. The duty to tell their story is ours. Our charter gold sponsor tonight, for tonight's lecture, is the Greenville Electric Utility System, commonly referred to in Greenville as GEUS, but spelled G-E-U-S. On behalf of the Roundtable, please accept our thanks for your generosity, those of you in the audience that's from GEUS. Charter Gold sponsors support the direct costs of bringing our speakers to Greenville. Before I continue, we have a very special guest in our audience this evening that we want to recognize, for he played a major role at East Texas State University many years ago. To introduce him, I'd like to present to you Dr. Larry Clinton, that we all know as Rocky, who retired from Texas A&M University Commerce as a global program professor, handling global programs for the university. Associate Vice President, I should have said. Rocky, could you do the introduction?
Yes, I could. When you're a young professor at a university, you look for leaderships that inspire you. And one of the most important events that happened in my time at A&M Commerce, East Texas State, was a program called Sam Rayburn Symposium. And that lit my fires in terms of what the university, the academy was about. And that leadership, that vision came from a gentleman sitting next to me here, who was the Dean of Arts and Science, became president of West Virginia Institute of Technology, and I would like to introduce him to you, Dr. John Carrier. John?
You want to say a word, John?
Hello.
Very articulate.
And thank you. And my heart has been in East Texas State University since 1969. And that's how long I've known this gentleman over here in good times and bad. But one of the most satisfying achievements I ever had was bringing in a lot of national and international speakers to tell us about the world situation. And it's good to see that you're still doing it. Thank you.
Lest we forget, I'm sorry.
I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce Dr. Robert Rodriguez, professor of political science, who's here tonight, because he is the future of the university. We're yesterday. Robert, would you stand and be recognized?
Thanks for being here, Robert. And lest we forget, Sam Rayburn was on the podium on December 8th, 1941, when Franklin Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war. Is that correct? I think that's correct.
Yes.
Yeah. From Bottom, Texas, by the way, for those of you who might have not remembered him. Our special thanks to the Audie Murphy American Cotton Museum for hosting our roundtable lectures. Staff members Kristen Still and Susan Lanning have been invaluable with their support. Other roundtable volunteers this evening include Kristen White and Preston Norris, who greeted you upon arrival. Matt Middleton also is our videographer for the program and works for GEUS. And thank you very much for your volunteer efforts this evening. At the conclusion of tonight's lecture, the screen behind me will be lifted and attendees are welcome to tour the Audie Murphy portion of the museum. Seated behind me, and when that screen goes up, will be our lecturer this evening, our speaker this evening, and she will have her books for sale. And so you can talk some more to her and visit with her as you tour the museum. Or if you don't need to tour the museum, please say hello to her and thank her for being here. Following Jewelle Kuenstler's lecture, Q&A will follow. A microphone will be brought to you. And please wait until Kristen, the lady that greeted you up front, brings it to you before asking the question. Why? So the audio will be captured on video. By the way, if you renew or become a charter member tonight, her book, as well as all books in the bookstore, will be 20% off this evening. Plus, the museum will extend a complimentary one-year individual membership to you. Should you wish to make a cash donation to the roundtable for tonight's lecture, you may do so at the cash register. Just make sure we get your name and address so we can thank you. On your seat are 3 pages, front and back. Sorry about that, but if you haven't already, please take a moment to either read or complete as requested with the pen or pencil provided, and after the lecture, leave them on your seat or turn them in at the cash register. One of the pages I want to point out lists 2 major events on May 18th, 2024 that relate to World War II and will be of interest to you. One is the commemorative Air Force's fly-in at Majors Field featuring World War II aircraft. And the other is 2 major lectures relating to World War II at Audie Days, the museum's annual tribute to Audie Murphy. Susan Lanning indicates that there will be time for you to make both events during the day. This past Monday, we were able to confirm Don Graves, a 100-year-old World War II Marine from the Fort Worth area who landed on Iwo Jima on February 19, 1945. And he indicated he could be with us on July 25th. I had the good fortune to spend time with him a couple of weeks ago. He told me he was 15 feet from where the flag was raised on Iwo Jima. 24,053 Marine casualties were incurred in the 36 days of the battle, with 6,140 of them killed, or 170 per day Marines were killed in that battle. We are currently planning the program at the museum unless advanced interest requires us to consider a larger site. The program previously scheduled for July 25th, Patton's Rise to Glory by Stephen Moore, has now been moved to October 25th. And now, for the introduction of our speaker. Please welcome Skip Steele of Paris, Texas. Skip is the first vice chairman of the Roundtable and co-chair of the Programs Committee. A graduate of East Texas State University, a man who has spent his entire career in journalism and authoring over 30 books about World War II military leaders from Northeast Texas, as well as lesser-known public figures from the region. Skip.
Julie mentioned that she was nervous because she wasn't a PhD. Well, I was walking down the hall today and I saw my hat. And I'll guarantee you a DD 214 is worth a lot more than a PhD. And I learned that this week over at the VA hospital while I was taking the x-ray. I was in there free of charge, and nobody arguing about anything. You know, one thing neat, I read her book, and then I started looking on YouTube's, and I ran into Bomber Harris last night. Has anybody seen that? I gave you a little buff sheet to tell you to go look at it in the next week or so, and you'll understand the bombing missions that went on during 41 to 45 in Europe. And then I got to thinking, I didn't do much in the Air Force, but I was probably just a few doorsteps away from a general whose captain asked me one day to do his July 4th speech. And I said, I've never even met the damn guy. I said, what did he do? And he said, well, I think he flew a B-17, or something like that. The guy was Niles Ullman, and he'd been a general since he was 26 years old. Those pilots that flew in World War II, and all their crew were just 17 to 28 years old, and the pilot ranks were all in the lieutenant colonel to colonel realm. And of course, I got to thinking, poor old General Ullman, he didn't understand the 1970 second lieutenant, had no clue what our thinking was all about. And by the way, it's really funny that we're having all these riots on campus, and man, we just thought that was what you did. We went downtown in Washington, D.C. just to see 250,000 people show up to complain about the Vietnam War. But I have also met another B-17 pilot. I'd forgotten about him, named Doug Williams from Paris, Texas, and he served his 30-some-odd missions, came back and stuck his arm in his dad's gin and pulled it off. And so for the rest of his life, he ran around with that metal grip, and come up behind you and grab your arm, and grab the hairs would go everywhere. But anyway, I'm not going to say anything else because Julie has a wonderful presentation to tell you about probably the worst job, worse than being a garbage man, probably, to sit in the tail end of a bomber and watch everything from going behind you, and they're all going that way and you're looking that way. So Jewelle Kuenstler from Stamford, Texas. Thank you.
So thank you very much. If you can't hear me, let me know because I'm a walker, okay? This is on, right? Is this on? Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay, well, I am so excited to be here tonight. I really am. I was just thrilled to think that anybody wanted to listen to me. So I want to tell you just a little bit about me. So let's see. Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong thing, okay. So bear with me, okay? Just bear with me. So I wanted to tell you how this story started. It all started with a scrapbook. So when I was growing up, you love to look at the scrapbooks. There's your mom in this funky looking swimsuit. There's your uncle when he had hair, There's your granddad hugging somebody else that's not your grandmother that nobody wants to talk about, So it all started with this scrapbook. But it was a scrapbook that was really boring to me, okay? The scrapbook just had newspaper clippings in it. And I just thought that was so boring. Why would I want to look at a scrapbook with newspaper clippings? So every time we would go through the scrapbooks, that was one I just put to the side, okay? Well, as I get older, as I get married, as I have a child of my own, I rediscovered this scrapbook. And this is what I found. So this scrapbook was started. There's my grandfather on the right. Isn't he handsome? Yeah. He was never that skinny after that. Okay. And then this is my great-grandmother. This is on their cotton farm in West Texas. And when he graduated from high school in May of 1941, he wanted to get out of this small community. He wanted to go on an adventure. And he wanted to join the Army. This is May of 1941. So this was before we were officially in the war. Let me move on. So she started this scrapbook. She didn't want him to miss out on things that he was going to miss from home. So this is in the scrapbook. This was, his team was honored with some, like first team all district, second team all district. My grandfather is number 1 there. Can you see that? Now, something you need to know about how small our community was. You see the coach? The coach is his first cousin. 8 of the players on an 11-man football team were Reeves. They were all first cousins. And if you messed up during the game, then their cousin Dave couldn't be like a regular coach and just yell at you or tell you you're going to run. He would literally beat you up at halftime. And what are you going to say? You know, it's your first cousin. I mean, that's just what it was. So anyway, I think that's so funny, but that just tells you how small our community is. She included a picture of a cotton crop that was really good. We were getting to the point of war. We didn't know when we were going to get into war, so she cut this out. My grandfather, much like Ray Perry, was a farm boy, grew up in the country, was an excellent shot and loved to hunt. And he was an excellent shot because you didn't have as many bullets as you wanted. You only had so much ammunition and you needed to bring back something to show for it. So because he was an excellent shot, at the age of 18, he was put on the skeet team, the skeet shooting team for the Army Air Corps. And he traveled and went all over with this team. They won nationals. All of this happened, so she has a clipping of that. Then the first casualty in our community happened. In the little town of Avoca, which was only 15 minutes from where he grew up, young Dayton Masters there was on the Arizona when it was hit on December 7th, 1941. Dayton Masters also joined the Navy right after he graduated from high school in May of 1940. They were hearing stories about this war going on in Europe. You got to remember, these are small town people, mainly farmers, or they worked for farmers, but very small town. So the mother was extremely worried that he would be sent to Europe. Much to her delight, he was sent to Pearl Harbor. I mean, that's as far away from this war in Europe as you could get. It was an exotic place. He was excited. He sent home pictures of him and his friends on the beach. And then here comes December 7th. They didn't hear anything from their son. A week later, they received a telegram from the U.S. Navy that said, "Your son is missing in action." A week after that, they received another telegram. "Your son is missing in action and assumed dead." This is right before Christmas. This mother, and as a mother myself, I could only imagine the anguish she went through. She didn't accept it. She kept telling everyone, "No, he's just hurt. He's wandering the beach. He's in a strange place." And the family just shook their heads sadly. Christmas was a very sad affair that year. The day after Christmas, the local postmistress calls her, says, "Mrs. Masters, you have a package here. Can you come get it?" Slowly, with her heart heavy, she walks to the post office. When she gets the package, it's from Dayton. She takes it home. He's alive. He's got to be alive. He sent me this package. When she opens it, he had mailed it on December the 5th to make sure she got it in time for Christmas. She died thinking that he was still alive. This was the first man killed in Jones County, the first man that was personally known by our family that died in World War II, but he definitely wasn't the last. As you go through this scrapbook that she had started, that started out so positive with all these news events that were going on, it started to be more and more obituaries. And these obituaries just weren't from World War II. These were people that were personally known by my family. Personally known. They either knew the parents or they knew the child. 41 obituaries were in this scrapbook. And I thought to myself, these are stories that need to be told. Every one of these has a story. If you look at the one on the far right, John Reeves, he was actually in that football picture. He was my grandfather's first cousin. He died, and he left a young widow and 2 little boys, one of which he had never seen. When he died, it broke my grandfather's heart. My grandfather never went overseas, and he always felt very bad about that. Once the war started, he was sent to a gunnery school, and he was an instructor. But he always felt like he didn't do enough. He always was ashamed that he didn't go overseas when all of his friends did. So in telling Ray's story, I feel like I'm telling the story of thousands of young men who went into the military. And they didn't have a glamorous job. Most of them were probably grunts. But man, collectively, look at the extraordinary thing that they did. Before I go any farther, I do want to tell you, number one, I am not a World War II expert. Number two, I'm not a B-17 expert. Number three, I'll probably say something incorrect. Feel free to correct me later, okay? But this book is based on Ray's story. This is Ray's story, how he remembered it, how he saw his place in the military, how he saw his place in the war. So just remember, I'm telling this story. I'm not telling, I tried to research his facts, but if I do get something wrong, feel free to tell me later, okay? But don't embarrass me and raise your hand and tell me that I'm doing it wrong, okay? So, let's begin. I have to catch up with my notes. So let me tell you a little bit about my family. Well, I am director of the Museum of the West Texas Frontier in Stanford. We actually go to or we service 27 different rural schools in West Texas. This is our biggest thing that we do. We feel like these rural schools need resources, and so we are a free resource to them. My husband, who is here with me tonight, he is a professional pilot. He's a corporate pilot. And our son up there is also a professional pilot. So this really hit home for me, talking about Ray being in the B-17, because I could kind of understand about the flying aspect and how when that bug hits, it really stays. In fact, just a little side note, my husband grew up right down the road from the Perrys, and Rick was a lot older than Tracy, but Rick Perry actually landed on, okay, he calls it a runway, but it was a waterway. Okay, it was a waterway in a field. And he took my husband on his first airplane ride, which kind of gave my husband a love for flying. This is a little bit about our museum, so if you would like to go and look at it, Facebook, we have a website, so I encourage you to go look at that. We talk about the 5 stages of settlement on the West Texas frontier, and that's kind of our name to fame. All right. This is my son, TJ, and when I was doing this PowerPoint, I forgot how sad and how emotional this book was for me when I wrote it. So the idea for this particular book, even though the idea began when I was very young, when my son was around 16, he was actually learning to fly. My husband taught him, and yes, they're still both alive. That was kind of touch and go there for a while, okay? But he was 16. My son had just soloed. He was working on getting his private pilot's license, and he really got into World War II aircraft. When we found out that Ray had been a tail gunner in a B-17 bomber, oh my goodness, my son was so excited. We've got to go and interview him, Mom. So I called and I arranged a time, and we went out there to interview him. Now, as a history teacher, when he began to tell me his story, I knew that this was really something that needed to be told. This was a story this was the story I was looking for, the story that could tell the story of thousands of military men just like him that were young and went in and did these jobs but didn't think they did anything special. In fact, the first thing that he told us, Ray did, was, I didn't do anything that special, you know. But he did. He did something remarkable. The second time that we went out, Amelia, his wife, and if you've ever met Amelia, she's a spitfire. I love her. I want to be just like her when I get old, just like her. She brings out this big old Tupperware. It's an orange Tupperware tub, and she opens it up, and there is all of the letters that Ray had written home to his mother. And Ray was not like a normal teenage boy. No, he wrote 2 to 3 times a week. So it was remarkable that she had all of these letters there. So we were just so excited. As we read these letters as a family from the perspective of an 18, 19-year-old boy, I have to tell you, my mama heart just kind of broke a little bit. He really didn't tell all the stuff because he didn't want to worry his mother. But yet it was enough that, wow, you knew what he was doing was dangerous. You knew that the places he was talking about being when it wasn't, you know, marked out, that he was right in danger's way. I was a teacher. I taught kids 13 to 18 years old. I could not imagine that here's this 18, 19-year-old boy writing about his experiences. I could not imagine this happening to the boys that I knew in high school. To think that these young men went to fight in a war at their age, I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. Then, as my son and I talked about Ray's stories and read the letters, and we researched a little bit more on what his job was, my son began to think about a career in the military after high school. Okay, I have to tell you, I was not happy. I was devastated. He is our only child, not just my only son, but our only child. And I at first just, you know, kind of dismissed him, and then he really started researching it. He started meeting with people who were in the military. He wanted to fly in the military. So one day I sat him down and I told him, I don't like this idea. What if I lose you? I mean, you're my only child. And his reply could have come out of the mouth of Ray Perry himself. He turned to me without any fear, without any tears, and he said, but Mom, what if I could die helping others live? You know, these are point words coming from a young man. Words I was quick to dismiss due to his age and his inexperience. But how many thousands of young men, just like Ray, thought the same thing about joining up in World War II? You know, Ray was a junior in high school when Pearl Harbor happened and we entered the war. That was the same age as my son when I wrote this book. He wanted to go and do his duty. In fact, Ray told me over and over, I was so scared the war would be over before I got there, before I had time to get there. He said he never had second thoughts about it. It needed to be done, and he wanted to play his part. These heroic men have influenced my son to see that he has a duty to his country as well. My son has a servant's heart just like Ray, and just like thousands of other good old boys in America. This is when I decided I wanted to preserve this story in a book that could be shared. This story needed to be told. So let's talk about the young man Ray. Ray came from a family of farmers. His great-great-grandfather came to Texas in 1846 at the age of 18. You're going to kind of see a pattern that at the age of 18, these Perry boys just thought they had to do something cool, okay? So his great-great-grandfather, when the Civil War came about, he actually joined the 19th Texas Infantry for the Confederate States of America. His grandfather, Wayne Perry, came to Haskell as a 7-year-old boy. Then his father was born here in Haskell County, and then Ray himself was born. He was the oldest child of Hoyt Perry. Ray graduated from Paint Creek High School in 1943. If you look at this middle picture of Ray, isn't he good looking? And doesn't he look like he's a mess? How many teachers do I have out here? Do I have some teachers? Okay. Doesn't he look like one of those kids that you're going to love but's going to pull something in class? Doesn't he? Yeah. I've taught a lot of those. Yeah, exactly. Not bad enough to send him to the principal, but enough to send him outside in the hall. Yeah. That's him when he was a junior in high school. That's him when Pearl Harbor was bombed. The picture on the far right over there, that's him when he signed up. I was looking at Audie Murphy's pictures when he signed up, and he looked like a baby. Looked like such a young man. I think Ray looks the same way. He weighed, he says, 143 pounds, okay, when he joined up. I don't know, he was awfully little. And he didn't grow up tall until he got out. He was one of those that didn't actually have his growth spurt till he was in his 20s, okay? He wanted to be a pilot in the military. So he had heard that if you want to sign up, you better go ahead and go to the Army Air Corps and sign up. Because if not, they're just going to put you in the Army and you're going to be in infantry. And he wanted to be a pilot really, really bad. So the day after he graduated, guess what this man does? He gets on a bus and he comes to Dallas. Now that might not be a big deal today, but back then he had only gone 20 miles from his home most of his life. He had been to Fort Worth one time where his uncle lived, okay? So he had not been very far at all, and he just jumps on this bus, goes to Dallas, asks somebody on the street, hey, where's that place I need to go sign up? And they pointed him in the right direction, and he went and signed up that day. Throughout his time in the war, he was a great letter writer. But his letters had three main themes. Excitement, man, this was a great, grand adventure. Homesickness, and the food. He was all about the food, okay? You're going to see that over and over in his letters. The food was good. Boy, I don't like this food. They don't cook like you do, Mama. Could you send me some of those sausages? Could you have Grandma make me this cake? You know, the one with the hole in the middle? It was an age-old food cake, by the way. I also included in the book the newspaper, the local newspaper, which was called the Haskell Free Press. And it includes snippets of what was going on in the area while he was away in the military. And I got the idea from my great-grandmother collecting those newspaper articles from their local newspaper. And I thought that was just a good way to show you what was happening in the community while he was overseas and serving. So let's move on to the next one. So basic training, Fort Sill to Shepherd's Field. Now, I found it interesting, and maybe somebody later can explain why. He went and signed up the day after graduating. So in May of 1943, he went and signed up. But he didn't report for duty until December 22nd of 1943. I thought that was very interesting. I couldn't find why. So if anybody has an idea, they can tell me afterwards. So when it's time for him to leave, when it's time for him to go, his father, Hoyt Perry, gave him this $2 bill. And if you notice, all the corners are torn off of this $2 bill. He gave it to Ray to keep for good luck. Do you know that Ray carried that in his pocket for the next 60 years? He stopped carrying it in his pocket when Amelia made him a scrapbook, and she put this in there. It meant that much to him. And you have to remember, in rural West Texas, people were poor. We were almost subsistence, or we were still reeling from the effects of the Great Depression, very muchly so. So $2 was like $100, but he never spent it because it meant more to him as a sentimental thing than it did as money. At Fort Sill was the reception area where new soldiers were given clothes and then shipped on to Shepherd's Field in Wichita Falls for basic training. So he sends a letter, December the 24th, 1943. Dear folks, I got out to Fort Sill on time yesterday morning, and everything is going fine. We have nice barracks with cots. On our cots, we have 2 sheets, 2 wool blankets, 1 mattress, and 1 pillow. I think that's hilarious. He's telling what his bedding is. Our chow is fine. I have to get up at 4 a.m. Christmas morning and be on KP by 5. Everyone in our barracks except 2 is on KP. I got my clothes yesterday, and I got more clothes than I ever saw. We got 6 pairs of pants, 1 blouse, 1 overcoat, 1 raincoat, and a bunch of other stuff. Love, Ray. Now, that shows he was a product of the Great Depression. This kid probably only had 2 sets of clothes his entire life, his Sunday clothes and his work clothes. And here, 6 pairs of pants. That's just amazing. He always started and ended his letters the same. Dear folks, love, Ray. He was at Fort Sill for 7 days. During those 7 days, he sent home 2 letters. Then he's going to go to Shepherd Field. He arrived December 29th, 1943. He writes home, Dear folks, I thought I'd write you a line and give you my address. We got to Shepherd Field this morning and got our barracks. I think I like the Army okay so far. I really liked it at Fort Sill. He was only there for 7 days. But we got up here with a bunch of Yankees, and I don't like them at all. We start out training about next Monday, January 3rd, and it will last about 48 days. I love that. I really do. Because I have found another theme or another change that World War II brought to our small community. When you live in a bubble and you never go farther than 20 miles from your home, you are only with people who believe a certain way. You don't get to see people from other religions, from other places, from other backgrounds. So the Civil War had still, generational prejudices had just trickled down. Yankees were bad. We were good. Well, it's so funny that he says this, and I want you to remember this later, because his crew of 9, I believe 7 of which were Yankees. And they were closer to him than his own brothers were. So it really changed his perspective on a lot of things. And I see that through a lot of World War II interviews that I've done with local people, how it really changed the way they thought about certain groups of people. The majority of Ray's B-17 crewmen were Yankees, and he loved them. But his main goal was he wanted to become a pilot. He's going to be sent to the Kingman Aerial Gunnery Training School, Kingman, Arizona, March 3rd, 1944 to April 19th. So, the first letter he sends, saw mountains and snow. Now remember, he's from West Texas. There are no mountains. Barely hills, okay? Snow, maybe once a year. This past year, we didn't get any snow. We saw a few flakes, but that was it, okay? So that was a big deal for him. He rode on a passenger train car, which was a novelty for him. Food, another common theme. He talks about it was really good. We had steak and fried chicken. Now listen to this part. This is another part that shows you that Great Depression coming out. He talks about they have this good food. They just set it out on the table. And Mom, they set a bowl of butter on the table, and you can get as much as you want. Is that not amazing? I mean, think about that. That was probably something that, you know, you can get a little bit, you can put a little bit. But he was amazed. You can just help yourself. He talks about the PX. He talks about how the cigarettes are only $1.30 a carton. And then in one of the letters, apparently he's replying to something his dad asked, and he goes, well, Dad, I can only bring 2 cartons back home to you. After that, they say I could go to prison. I thought that was pretty funny. Candy and gum was only 3 cents, and he talks about, tell Aunt Thelma that I will bring her some candy and gum, because I know she loves it, but she doesn't always get it. 3 cents for candy and gum. Gunnery school kept him busy, but he grew up hunting. And so to him, it was fun. It was exciting. This was something he knew, and he excelled at it. This is where he had his first B-17 ride. He talks about all those other guys barfed, but I didn't get sick one time. Doesn't that sound like an 18-year-old boy? Yeah, doesn't it? And throughout his time over in England, He said he never got airsick. Now, the pictures that I'm going to show you here are not his pictures. These actually come from the website from Kingman Gunnery Aerial Base, whatever it was called. But all these pictures, if you read the book, all of these stories that he talks about, all these letters he writes home, he is discussing these things, okay? He discusses a sock being pulled behind a plane for the B-17 for target practice. He finally says the excitement has worn off and he has been offered a different part in the war. The letter dated March 13th, 1944. They told us that we could volunteer to be an instructor when we finished. I think that I'm going to do this because after we get our instructor school done, we will be sent to one of the 5 gunnery schools in the U.S. We'll have to stay at that field for 15 months, but I think that might be better than going overseas. Most of the boys don't want that. The boy from Plainview, I've decided he and I are going to do that. So all of a sudden, it's kind of worn off, this excitement. He's getting a little scared about going overseas. He's starting to read more newspapers. He's starting to hear about more of his friends that are POWs over in Germany. He's starting to find more and more that have died. He's starting to kind of second guess this thing. While there, he practiced mostly in the top turret of the plane. And I thought this was interesting. This is one way that they would also practice. They would ride in the back of this airplane. What kind of plane is that, Tracy? AT-6. And they would fire out of it, okay? I like this one because they had to practice on that. And sometimes they would have this one on the ground, if I read this correctly, and they would pull it behind a Jeep and you had to shoot, okay? The last 2 weeks, they had flight training in a B-17. It was after this flight training that all thoughts of staying safely in the States as an instructor were put aside. His skill with a gun and his love of flying made his choice for him. While he was there, he wrote 16 letters home. He described training in the B-17. An AT-6 is a single-seater trainer, and they put a rope on the tail end of it with you would call it a big round thing, something like a windsock. This is Ray's voice. That air would catch in, and it was made out of ducking. The B-17 would be making all different kinds of maneuvers, and you'd shoot at that target, which was on the end of that rope. And there would be a certain color of paint on the end of my bullets and the other gunners. And they'd get that thing back to the base, and they'd tell how many I hit or how many the other gunner hit. In his letter, April 16th, 1944, he said, "The best thrill I had was ground strafing, about 150 feet off the ground." By the end of the training, he had totally changed his mind about being an instructor. He wrote home on April the 19th of 1944, "I sure do hope I can talk my way out of this instructor deal. I'd be stuck out there for about 15 months, and I sure don't want to be here." He was a very good shot, and that was one of the reasons they wanted him to be an instructor. Shooting on the range, 600 rounds at a time. He would send home letters, and in one letter he said, "We shot up 200 rounds in about 15 or 20 minutes, and each shot cost 17 cents. You can figure out, Dad, where all your tax money is going." I thought that was pretty cute. In his March 19th, 1944 letter, he tells his parents he took apart and reassembled a .50 caliber machine gun in 28 minutes. He loved shooting skeet, and he often wrote about how for fun, him and some buddies would go, they could get as many boxes of ammunition as they wanted, and they would go out and they would just shoot skeet all afternoon if they weren't on duty. That's something you couldn't do in the Depression days. You were given so many bullets, and you better come back with something to show for it. So he was really having a good time. Next, he's going to go to Lincoln, Nebraska, where he is going to meet his crew. So this base served as an overseas deployment staging area for bombardment groups and fighter squadrons. It took 2 days by train to get there. His first letter from Lincoln to home is not as upbeat. It was written on May 1st, 1944. "Dear folks, I will really be glad when I leave here. I don't like the camp or the country. I haven't seen the sun since I've been here. All of us boys got split up when we got here. So the group of boys that he's been with through basic training and gunnery school, they're now getting split up. For someone that had hardly traveled beyond Haskell or Stanford his entire life, he had now been stationed in 4 camps in 3 different states and had traveled through much more country. His next letter expresses an underlying fear that was always worrying the soldiers: spies and espionage. Back in Wichita Falls, Ray had had to return camp before his leave was over due to multiple fires being set on the base. So his letter, dated May 2nd, 1944, states, "I guess you wondered why I didn't write while I was on the train. They would not let us write, for they were afraid somebody would get a hold of the letter." Ray was not a fan of Nebraska, saying in his next letter, dated May 4th, 1944, "It's pretty cold here and the wind is blowing hard. The sun has shined 1 day since we got here. I'm all through here and I ought to be gone by this time next week. I'll be glad when we leave this Yankee land and get back down in the good old South." Oh, Ray. Still a lot of prejudice and generational carryover of hostilities, but the war is going to change that. So let's meet his crew. We have Eugene "Pop" Bowman. We have Sandy Heron. We have Ray Perry. We have the captain, Barney Glovick. We have Norman Sachs. We have William Monkovich. They called him Monk. We had Bert Relton. We have Charles Chuck Buda. And not pictured was Charlie Clark, the co-pilot. This was his crew that he met in Nebraska. This would be his crew till the end of the war. This is the B-17 bomber. You can see all of the guns. You can see the ball turret at the bottom. Did anyone watch Masters of the Air or read the book On a Wing and a Prayer? I had to tell you, as many interviews as I did with Ray, as much as I talked to people who had been in B-17s, that for me was awesome to be able to really see a visual of where they were, how small it was, how much it bounced around. I really enjoyed seeing that. Okay, so let's talk about the different positions. We have the bombardier is in position number 1, the navigator in position number 2, the pilot and the co-pilot, 3 and 4, the top turret gunner and engineer, 5, the radio operator and gunner, 6, the ball turret gunner, 7, a right waist gunner and a left waist gunner, 8 and 9, and then the tail gunner, which was Ray Perry's position, number 10. So let's talk about which crew members were in each position. So Monk, who is from Michigan, a Yankee, he was in number 1. Meeting people of different faiths, here we go. Norman Sachs. Did I get that? Yes. Norman Sachs. He was the navigator. He's in position number 2. Meeting people of different faiths was a new thing for Ray. Ray had probably never met a Jew. As far as I know through research in Stanford and Haskell, there was only one Jewish family, and they were there between 1905 and the 1920s, and they left after that. So he probably never knew a Jew until now. He was under the impression that he was part of a wealthy family that lived in the Northeast. He was from Connecticut. He kept saying over and over that this guy was just a good feller, and he thought the world of him. And they stayed close until the end of their lives. The next one was the pilot, Barney Glovick. He was from Michigan. Barney took Ray under his wing. Barney was a fine feller, according to Ray, and a top-notch pilot. He was a little older than most of the pilots, said Ray. He was 25 or 27. You know, most of those pilots were 21 or 22, and I was always glad to fly with a pilot I thought had a little more maturity than most of those other pilots. He was single, and I followed him around just like he was my daddy. Of course, I was just 18 years old when I got with him. For all his talk about Yankees, isn't it ironic that the man Ray admired most was a Yankee? So here's the co-pilot, CO Charlie Clark, who was from Kansas. Ray had several pictures with Charlie in them, from clowning around on bicycles to hanging out with the crew on base and in London. It seemed to me that Charlie was one of those good time guys. He really enjoyed having a good time. The top turret gunner and the engineer was Eugene Pop Bowman. His name was Pop because he was the oldest guy in the group. He was a whopping 27 years old. He had a wife and 2 kids back home. He and Ray would also have a lifelong friendship. The next was the radio operator and gunner, W.C. Sandy Heron from Nebraska. Ray and he buddied up together. We were both country boys. He lived in this little old town in Nebraska, and his daddy was a policeman. He and I kind of talked the same language. They were both 18 at the time. The ball turret gunner, Bert Relton from California. Ray described Bert as always on the edge of the group, belonging to their crew, but not really a part of it. Bert, he said, was terrified most of the time. They tried to encourage him, but they knew he hated being assigned ball turret gunner. Waist gunner, Chuck Buda from Ohio. Normally, at the beginning, on a B-17, there were 10 positions, which included 2 waist gunners. But by the time Ray got over there with his crew, they had eliminated one of the waist gunners. So they had a crew of 9. Chuck Buda was expected to shoot out of both sides. He believed that all the B-17s at that time did the same due to lack of trained men compared to the number they were losing. Ray explained, down the side of the fuselage in that airplane, there's a window, and it's open about a 3x3 square, and a machine gun was mounted right there. He could shoot out of either side. On his plane, there was a total of 13 50 caliber machine guns, some of which required one man to fire 2 different guns, such as the ball turret, which had 2 guns side by side. And then we get to Ray, Joseph Ray Perry from Texas. Ray said, of course I had 2 guns back there, mounted side by side. He explained that there was an intercom system for all the crew members to stay in contact during flight. Now they're going to move on to Dyersburg, Tennessee. It was the only inland B-17 Flying Fortress training base east of the Mississippi River. In less than 3 years of operation, approximately 7,700 B-17 crewmen received their last phase of training at this facility. Officially, it was called the ETO Indoctrination Course, European Theater of Operations. He talks more about free time to go to town and hanging out with the local girls. He discusses getting vaccinations and how they made him sick. He talks about they began to go on training bombing missions, flying where crews could practice working as a team. He talks about, even though they were in Tennessee, he writes a letter home and he says they go over Fort Worth, where his aunt and uncle lived. He said, it was probably bad, but I was praying that we'd have engine trouble and would have to land, and I'd be able to stay the night with them. He said, but it didn't happen. Many of the men were given a promotion and a pay raise before being sent overseas, which proved to be the case for Ray. While Ray was here, he turned 19. The Haskell Free Press, the hometown newspaper that Ray received to keep up with news from home, published a blurb about him. Promoted to corporal, Colonel Merlin Carter, station commander of Army Airfield Dyersburg, Tennessee, announced the promotion of Joseph R. Ray Perry from private first class to corporal. Corporal Perry is the son of Mr. and Mrs. Hoyt Perry, who reside at Haskell. Prior to his entry into the armed services, he was a student at Paint Creek High School. Now, if you don't know where Paint Creek is a 6-man school. And I think Ray said that when he was in high school, they had 60 kids from freshmen to seniors, okay? It's not much different today. It's a very, very small school. It is still there. Yes, sir, it is. The men he trained with at Dyersburg stayed with Ray until they returned to the States in 1945. Final farewell. He was really missing home. And he kept sending letters saying, I'm supposed to get a furlough. And then his next letter would say, they're telling us we're not going to get our furlough. I really want to see y'all. I'm about to go overseas. His letters just kept saying this over and over. So his family surprised him. They drove from Paint Creek, Texas to Tennessee to see him on base. This is his mother, his sister, and his 2 little brothers. So this is Francis, Ray, Thelma, Dawn, and Jean. And yes, his mother's name was Thelma and his aunt's name was Thelma. Don't ask me. We name all the same names out there. I don't know why. He thought that this was going to be the last time he was going to see his family. And he had his picture made. He went to a little town outside of where he was stationed. He had his picture made in his uniform. He sent a whole bunch of copies home to his mom with specific instructions on who to send those pictures to. Okay? And he complained about how expensive it was. Now, I think that that's amazing that they made that trip because you have to remember they were rationing rubber, they were rationing gas. These people were poor farmers. They did not have the money, but they scraped the money together to go up and see their son because they knew this might be their last time. Unexpectedly, though, the military gave him a 10-day pass. So even though they made their trip, they ended up giving him a 10-day pass, and he was able to return home to say goodbye to extended family and to other friends and neighbors. And then he's off to England. His combat destination was Horsham, England, and he had to make several stops on his way. I did my best to figure out where exactly these stops were. He couldn't remember all of them. I did get his military record, but some of it was vague. So if I do something wrong on this, you can let me know afterwards. So his first stop is going to be at Kearney, Nebraska. He reported for duty at Kearney, Nebraska on July 29, 1944, where the crew got back together and picked up a brand new B-17. You would have thought that this was his personal car. Oh my goodness, he bragged about it, talked about how sleek she was. I had to read the letter twice to make sure he wasn't talking about a girl, okay? But he was so impressed with this B-17. However, and I found this very interesting, the crew still did not know their final destination. They had to go, when they got to their first stop, then they were told what their second stop was. When they got to that, then they were told their third stop, and so on and so on. They had no idea they were going to England. Ray wrote home, I looked at one of the new planes yesterday, and they are really the thing. The tail has more armor plating than I'd expected. The whole tail has been redesigned, and the guns are going to cover a lot more territory. Now, don't you know that's just something a mama wants to hear when her son's going off to war, okay? The tail gunner's position was unique, and the plane had been redesigned to accommodate and aid the tail gunner in being more efficient since the first B-17s that came out. Ray explained, well, I had to crawl around the tail wheel. There was more room back there than you would think. I only weighed about 142 pounds, and I was only 5'10". I had to carry my chute. We used chest chutes. I already had my flak jacket back there and a big old helmet that you'd put on if you were in any aircraft fire. I think I already had my parachute back there, though. I didn't get too far from that parachute. Being a tail gunner was a rather lonely position in the plane. He was isolated from the rest of the crew. Of course, there was the intercom. I could talk to the crew, but I couldn't even hear the communication between the airplanes. I wasn't even hooked up to that. The radio operator was, and of course both pilots were, but all the communication I had was the intercom. This is going to prove important in Mission 6. Ray said, I wasn't all that crowded. I flew backwards, all the time, but I had plenty of room to turn my guns. Some people have got the idea that the tail gunner just couldn't move at all. In fact, I've had people ask me if I laid on my belly. Originally, when those B-17s were first built back in the 30s, they did lay down on their belly, but they figured out right quick they didn't provide any mobility. I'm sorry, I have to use his tone when he talks because he was just so funny. He was just a good old boy. He really was. So that's Ray up there in his tail gunner's position. Good-looking guy. Look at the way he's got that hat on. Equipment. This is him and Sandy Hearn, his buddy, and they're in the radio area. By the equipment they were given, crews began to speculate as to their destination. This is Sandy Hearn. He was the radio operator. Some of the equipment, we had our long handles and then our heated suit over that, and then we had a set of coveralls, then we had a flight suit, then on top of that we had those fleece-lined breeches and top, and of course our gloves and socks that were heated, great big old boots. Like those gloves, they'd hook up to your other suit. I know one day we started out and we'd already got up pretty high and it was cold, and my heated suit didn't work. It wasn't heating. Of course, we always carried some extras in the airplane, and I had to strip down to my long handles and put on another seated suit. When asked how cold it got, Ray replied, well, one day my right ear stuck to my headset. It was 56 below. 56 below. And see, those airplanes are open. You know, the wind is coming through there all the time. Their second stop was Grenier Field. This is going to be in New Hampshire. This airport was the primary staging base for heavy bombers en route to the war in Germany. So every time they stopped, they got a little bit more of an idea of where they were going. He left this field on August the 8th, 1944. Next stop is going to be Presque Isle, Maine. Next stop is going to be Goose Bay, Labrador. Next stop was going to be, bear with me, I have my little hooked on phonics thing up here, Reykjavik, Iceland. This was Meeks Field, was what was there. And remember, they were not told their destination. It was just, this is your next stop. This is your next stop. So they still didn't quite know where they were going. His sixth stop was in Northern Ireland. This is when they told them their final destination. He couldn't remember the name of the airfield, possibly Langford Lodge, so I went ahead and put that up. He knew it was an RAF airfield, but he couldn't quite remember the name. His crew left that brand new B-17 there. They had flown it without any guns on board. The plane would stay at this airfield to have guns and other equipment put in. Then this would be sent to England to replace a damaged or lost plane. Ray told about his next step. They paddled us across that little old stretch of water over to England. Then they put us on a train and they sent us to our base, which was Horham. Final destination, Horham, England. Ray wrote home that he arrived in England on August 14th, 1944. His crew was assigned to the 95th Bomb Group, the 336th. Oh my goodness, I've kept y'all here over an hour. I am so sorry. I will try to speed it up a little bit. The first few weeks, he conducted training missions, learning how to fly in formation. At this time, you had to complete 35 missions to be able to go home. There are several statistics out there, but it appears that the chances of surviving 25 missions was 25%. So the chances of surviving 35 missions without being wounded was pretty much zilch. So it wasn't looking good. Again, I was talking to someone, I don't remember who it was, earlier. They probably didn't know the statistics. These are statistics we know now, but at the time, they probably didn't know the statistics. So let's talk a little bit about the missions, and we'll go through these kind of quickly. Each bomb tag had a pin attached to it, which once removed armed the bomb. The flight engineer collected the bomb tags as he armed each bomb, and Ray brought home a tag from each mission where he wrote the date, the bomb load, the trip time, and sometimes he would talk about the mission, like a flak report or what the weather was like, or if anyone was injured. An escort of fighter planes would rendezvous with the B-17s over Germany and would escort them as close to their intended targets. They were nearly always P-51s, but sometimes they were P-47s. So here we have an example. Mission number 1 was September 26th. They went to Bremen. Did I say that right? Bremen. Okay. They were carrying 6 1,000-pound bombs. It took 6 hours and 50 minutes to flying time, and he wrote medium flak. This was a picture that his pilot took out of the cockpit. That's an amazing picture. I just love that. Mission number 2, he talks about, and if you knew Ray did not cuss, okay? They went to Merseburg, carrying 10 500-pound bombs. Took them 7 hours, and he put damn heavy flak, 74 holes in the plane. Ray took a picture of the flak that they experienced during the mission. So you can see the flak right there, and you can see all the B-17s going. Mission number 3, he put light flak, and they were carrying 12 500 bombs. After a bombing mission, the military would send in P-38s for reconnaissance to take pictures of the damage inflicted and possible vulnerable targets for future attacks. He talks about being debriefed after a mission. A truck waited for them to take them to headquarters. They would be debriefed. And during this debriefing, they did an RAF tradition, which was to take a shot. In the beginning, they had good American whiskey. He said, I loved it. But then they ran out of whiskey. And so they started doing French cognac. He said, I would put it in my mouth and then spit it out. He said he didn't like it at all. Mission number 4, Nuremberg, Germany, carrying 10 500-pound bombs, medium flak. This is a picture that he took of the bombs being released. Actually, I'm sorry, the pilot took this picture. And then number 5 was to Berlin, Germany. They were carrying 38 100-pound incendiary bombs. First time that they had done that. Took 8 hours and 10 minutes of flying time. He said lots of heavy flak, but not accurate. So I asked him what that meant. Does that mean the flak didn't hit you? He said, no, we didn't hit our target. And this is a picture that they took. He said, when we left the target and we got back over the English Channel, I could still see the smoke rising up over Berlin. Ray thought, the first 5 missions I flew, I thought, well, dang, if there ain't no more to this than war, no more to this war than this, it's going to be easy, you know? But they made a believer out of me on that 6th one. With only 5 missions behind him, Ray still had 30 missions left to complete before he could return home. And the very next mission would prove to be the worst of all. Mission number 6. This was October the 7th, 1944. They were carrying 10 500-pound bombs. It took 9 hours and 10 minutes of flying time, and they didn't get to their target. He puts on there, hit by fighters, I got one. This is a picture that he took from the back of his tail gunner's position. They were taking off to go to Bolin, and they were going to be bombing fuel targets and trains. It started off bad. Normally, 36 planes would fly on a mission, but only 25 were airworthy, so only 25 were able to launch that day. As they were going out, 4 had to turn back due to engine trouble. So 21 bombers went across the channel. They were scheduled to rendezvous with a fighter escort once they crossed the channel, but no fighter escort showed up. They couldn't figure out what happened. And as they were looking, they see fighters in the distance. At first, Ray says he was excited, but then as they got closer, realized that they were German fighters. As we were looking for our escort, the whole sky was full of German fighter planes, and we didn't have any escorts. Later, they told us we had a security leak, that the Germans knew when we were going to meet this group of fighter escorts. And they sent up a group to pick a fight with them before we got there. And then they sent this other group and jumped on us. The first air battle with the German fighters lasted only 15 minutes, but it had tragic results. The official mission report stated that the engaging aircraft attacks were very aggressive, but pilots seemed inexperienced. Ray agreed with that, based on a personal confrontation with a German Me-109. He stated, instead of flying a pursuit curve, he was headed straight for me, and I have two 50 caliber machine guns firing straight at him. This was towards the end of the war, and Germany was sending up green pilots out of necessity to replace those that were more experienced. This German fighter headed straight for the tail of my bomber. My guns were air-cooled, so I was supposed to fire a short burst to let them cool in between. But with that ME-109 breathing down on me, getting so close I could see the pilot in the cockpit, I just held the trigger down, closed my eyes, and prepared for impact. The impact didn't happen. When he realized he was still alive, he opened his eyes, and the fighter was gone. Later, other crews from neighboring B-17s told Ray that he had hit the German fighter, and the plane went right under the belly of the Heavy Date, trailing heavy smoke. When asked if he was scared, he grinned that lopsided grin and said, "I was too busy to be scared." He reflected a moment and said, "Maybe later, when I was back in my bunk, I felt scared. But at the time, I don't remember feeling any fear." Charles Chuck Buda, the waist gunner, also had his hands full. German fighters rained down on them, and while they watched helpless, the two bombers on either wing of their three-plane formation were shot down. As Ray recalled, when a plane went into a spin after being damaged, we'd watch them go down, and we'd sit there and count the boys that got out. Before the mission, the crew had been happily making plans to celebrate Chuck Buda's 19th birthday. That was that day. They had planned about going to the pub called the Green Dragon to celebrate his birthday. But this proved to be Chuck's last mission. During the air battle, Chuck was the waist gunner and busy shooting fighters from either side of the plane. Remember that the military had originally had 2 people for this position, but had eliminated one of the crewmen. Chuck had his sights on one of the fighters and successfully shot it down, but at great cost. Before he could register his kill, Chuck took a bullet to the chest, killing him instantly. The shot also took out all the communications throughout the plane, so they could not check on Ray in the tail gunner's position. They knew they had taken heavy fire. After the fighters flew off, they took a moment to check on their crew. The pilot ordered Sandy Heron, the radio operator, to check on everyone. He found Chuck dead, and he had to crawl into the tail, past the tail wheel, to check on Ray. It was just a quick check to make sure he was alive before he was ordered back to his position due to a possible attack happening again at any moment. Within half an hour, another group of fighters attacked the bombers. This group included 2 ME-163s, did I say that right? Which was Germany's rocket fighter plane. Shot up and heavy-hearted, the crew made it back to their air base in England. This was a painting that Rick Perry had commissioned in honor of that faithful 6th mission. It hung in the state capitol while he was governor. Ray remembered what happened when they landed. The medics came, and they took out Chuck's body. They took his oxygen mask off, and it was full of vomit, bloody vomit. They told us that meant he died instantly. After taking a moment to assess themselves, making sure they were all in one piece, the crew began to check on each other. The ball turret gunner, Burt Relton, had the hardest time. The death and destruction he witnessed from his glass ball in the belly of that B-17 had a dramatic effect on him. Ray recounted, Burt Relton never did like the ball turret gunner position. Barney assigned us to our gun positions, and he never did like it. He was scared most of the time, but after his 6th mission, where we got shot up so bad and it killed Chuck, Sandy and I had to help Burt out of that ball turret. He was just so mortified, and he couldn't get out. We helped him get out of there and kind of get his head screwed back on. He had urinated all over himself, and it was pretty traumatic because that many fighters jumping on us and airplanes going down all around, you know, we were the only one left of that 3-plane formation. Old Bert saw all of that, and he just locked down. And you know, later the armament people told us he hadn't fired a single shot the entire time. Later, the ground crew counted 174 holes in the fuselage and wings of the Heavy Date, and this is the Heavy Date right here. This was their tale. That was Ray. Ray said that when the armament men took his guns out to be cleaned, he had burnt them plumb up. He said one old boy told him off and said those Latz bullets were coming out end over end. Ray just laughed and he said, I didn't care. When I got a couple of German fighters coming at me and I can see the firing on his wings and the flash on his wings, I couldn't get off the trigger. I didn't care if I burnt those guns up or not. After being debriefed at length over the mission, Ray and his crew still had to deal with the death of their friend. Instead of the birthday celebration they had planned, they were dealing with a violent death. He said Barney, the pilot, had a hard time writing home the letter of condolences to Chuck's parents. In fact, Ray had a copy of one of the edits that he had made, a handwritten letter where he had marked out all these things and written things in the margin. He said he stayed up all night writing that letter. It's interesting to note, Ray didn't share this news with his parents for 4 months. I don't know if there was a gag order. I don't know if he wasn't allowed to tell or he was just dealing with it himself. But when he did write home, he referred to it very vaguely. In fact, it starts out like most of the other letters. And you don't even catch it until he says, we were allowed to go to old Chuck's funeral. And then he asked his mom to write to Chuck's mom. You know, I can only imagine the sick feeling that his mother felt when she read that letter. She had a kinship with that mother that lost her son. But yet in the same sense, she's probably feeling relief that Ray was okay. What a conflict of feelings. We'll go through this quickly. Missions 7 through 13. So you can see where all they went. And it's really interesting. After this, he really didn't have a lot to report. Slight flak, medium flak, light flak, no flak, bad weather. He even flew on Christmas Day. This is a copy of one of the tags that he got off the bomber. That up there is a copy of when they took off on Christmas Day. Look at all that snow. That's probably the first Christmas Day he ever had snow. I want you to look at this bomb tag in particular. You see where it says 12B? They didn't write 13 because 13 was an unlucky number. So they have Mission 12, Mission 12B, and Mission 14. More pictures here. Look at his buddies there. Look how young they are. That just blows me away. Missions 14 through 35. Again, over and over. He doesn't hardly say anything. He talks about it being colder, but there's no flak, not much flak, slight flak. He talks about when they had bad weather, lots of turbulence, things like that. He does talk about that on their 34th mission, they really thought, okay, we've got this made. We haven't hardly had any other problems since Mission 6. Well, on their 34th mission, they had another attack. And this particular one hurt Bert, the one who was terrified. It amazes me how these boys are so terrified and they had to get right back in that plane. Now, they did move Bert after the 6th mission. They moved him to waist gunner, to Chuck's position. And they got a new boy, if we go back, the one in the middle right there, the Eisenhower, he was the new guy that went into the ball turret. But they put Bert into the waist gunner. And Ray says he did better there. He felt better, he felt more protected there. But then on their 34th mission, after a bomb run to kill, they were returning home. They thought they were home free when some anti-aircraft guns fired at their plane. Bert took a chunk of shrapnel to his right chest. Ray and Sandy hauled him back onto the floor of the plane and gave him morphine. When they got him back to base, it turned out that he had taken shrapnel in several places. One piece lodged in his lung, another piece in his right chest, another piece went through his lung, Another piece cut him on his forehead, and a last piece stuck in his arm. Ray remembers visiting him in the hospital. We went over there to see him because we knew we were fixing to ship out, and I walked up beside his bed, and what it reminded me of was a dead cow. I could smell him. He wasn't very well taken care of. But the military just had too darn many wounded, and they were trying to take care of all of them. Anyway, he survived. Pop Bowman, the flight engineer, saw him after the war and said Bert had lost the use of that right arm. It had paralyzed it. I'll never forget the way he smelled in that hospital. Although Ray kept up with all of his crew members, Bert never joined them in any reunions. He never sent cards. He never really talked to anybody about his war experience. The only time they heard anything is if a fellow crew member ran into him. Today, Ray thinks he probably had PTSD, but in those days, he just suffered in silence. It makes you think how many more suffered in silence at that time. The last mission. I had to include the tag for the last mission. Look at it. The end. 35 missions. Ray beat the odds and made it. Ray recounted that he was in the tail of that airplane with the same pilot every mission and never got a scratch. That is amazing. This was quite a feat, not only surviving without any injuries, but flying with the same pilot every time. In fact, 4 of the original 9 crew members completed the 35 missions together. The first chance Ray got, he sent a telegraph home. Dear folks, completed missions, feeling fine. Hoping to see you soon. Stop writing, Ray. Life goes on. Ray returned home. He meets a sassy, pretty young thing named Amelia. They fall in love, get married, have 2 beautiful children, Rick and Milla. He becomes a successful farmer and a county commissioner. Ray kept in touch with the crew for the rest of his life. In 1999, Ray returned to England. This is a picture of him in front of the Bomber Glass Monument at an air base in Cambridgeshire, England. This is 4 generations of Perrys. There's Hoyt, there's Ray, there's Rick, and there's Rick's son, Griffin. Then I'm going to leave you with this. I'm going to try to get through this without crying. Which is funny because I'm on so many antidepressants I can't really cry, but this gets me every time, okay? Oh, I have to get a book. See, well, I'm such a professional. Look at this. I wanted to read this last part to you. In early 2017, Ray's health failed. He entered the Hendricks Hospice Care Center in Abilene, Texas, shortly before his 92nd birthday. In fact, he celebrated his birthday, the last he would see in this facility. Surrounded by family, Ray looked upon the legacy he had left behind. So very proud of his family and their accomplishments, but more importantly, in the people they'd become. During his stay at Hendricks Hospice Care Center, someone snapped a picture of Ray lying in his hospital bed, holding hands with his great-granddaughter, Ella. When looking at this photograph, Rick's words from the end of his article in 2000 that he wrote about his dad come back clearly. They were so brave that day. They changed the world as we know it. I hope my dad sees that in the eyes of a young French child, in the gleam of a young British lad, or in the admiring gaze of his own grateful son. Ray would tell you very quickly that he wasn't a hero. He was just doing his duty. And I like to think that as he held his great-granddaughter's hand, as he felt her youthful strength, just as his life was ebbing away, that he felt great contentment for a job well done. Because of his service, and many others just like him, his family can live in peace and know freedom. And I'm going to leave you with this picture. So young, and yet did so much. since I kept you so long, I'm sorry, I'm a Baptist and we like to talk, let me tell you. So if you don't want to stay for the book signing, which is perfectly fine, you can also find my book if you're interested in reading it. At Amazon, Texas University A&M Press, the National World War II Museum, Barnes & Noble, and Walmart's selling it. Wow, I have made the big time when Walmart is selling the book. Isn't that awesome? So thank you so much for listening to this story. This story means so much to my heart. Ray was an amazing man, just amazing. And what an example for my son to have. And no, my son did not go in the military. Not that I wouldn't have been proud of him, but I would have been really scared. Thank you very much for having me.
If you have any questions, Kristen will bring the microphone to you.
And if you don't, that's fine. I kind of answered everything, didn't I? Oh, I think he's got one.
Do you recall, did you ever come across Ray's rank when he was discharged? I was curious as to what his rank was when he.
Boy, you would ask me that, wouldn't you?
I don't know the official rank. I know he was a corporal because he didn't get any, he had written home that he wouldn't get anything higher than that. But I know I don't. Now, I can look it up for you. I could look it up for you. I'm sorry, I'm not very good with all the World War II stuff. Sorry.
Yes. How much money did he say? Oh, you mean in his letters?
You sent money home.
He did. He sent money home a lot, and it was enough to kind of get him started. He came back and he bought a car. That's what he did. He bought a car.
With all those tags that he had,
Yes.
were those saved by his mother, or like how did you get access to those after?
Those were saved by his mother, and then when he married Amelia, and in the 1990s, I think, Amelia put together this scrapbook, and she put all of those tags in the scrapbook. I do have pictures over here where you can see those tags laid out in the scrapbook. It really was amazing to see them. I mean, it really, really was. And to think that, I'm sorry, at 18 or 19, would you have had the wherewithal to bring those tags home?
No, I'm 18 and 19. I wouldn't have.
Exactly, exactly. So for him to do that was pretty good. Yeah. Anyone else? My favorite color is yellow. I like chocolate. Well, if that's all, thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it.
This video has been brought to you by GEUS. GEUS is your community-owned provider for electric, internet, cable TV, and true local programming.